The late afternoon sun bathed the quiet streets of Brookdale in a golden glow, casting long shadows along the sidewalks where families strolled leisurely. It was the kind of day that felt untouched by trouble, the kind of day where the world seemed to hum along without a care. For Xavier Collins, however, today was different. It wasn't just another Saturday. It was a day he had been waiting for, a day he had worked tirelessly to make special. 17 years old, tall for his age with deep brown skin and thoughtful eyes. Xavier was a young man with a quiet determination. He had spent the past 6 months juggling school, football practice, and extra shifts at Crescent Cafe, the small coffee shop on 5th Street, where the scent of roasted beans and fresh pastries clung to his clothes long after he left. Every spare dollar from his paycheck, every tip folded carefully into his wallet, had been saved for this moment. His mother, Celeste Collins, had given him everything: love, discipline, and an unshakable sense of self-worth. As a single mother and the chief of police in Brookdale, she carried the weight of her job and the expectations of an entire city on her shoulders. Despite the long hours and the burdens of leadership, she had never failed to show up for her son. Now, Xavier wanted to show up for her. Her birthday was coming up, and this year, he was going to give her something more than a homemade card or a bouquet from the grocery store. He had set his sights on a sterling silver necklace from Sterling & Company Jewelers, the most prestigious jewelry store in town. It was simple yet elegant, the kind of gift that would make her feel seen, appreciated. Standing outside the store, he exhaled slowly, steadying himself. The gleaming glass windows reflected his image back at him, his neatly pressed polo, his jeans, his sneakers laced up just right. He had made sure to look presentable. His mother had always warned him, "People see what they want to see, baby. You just make sure you give them nothing to question." Still, an unease prickled at the back of his mind. He adjusted his posture, squared his shoulders, and stepped forward, gripping his wallet in his pocket, a reminder that he belonged here just like anyone else. The door swung open with a soft chime, and he took his first step inside. He had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would go horribly wrong. The moment Xavier Collins stepped inside Sterling & Company Jewelers, he felt it. It wasn't loud. It wasn't obvious. But it was there, a shift in the air, a pause in movement, a glance that lingered a second too long. The store was pristine, the kind of place where the faint scent of polished wood and expensive cologne floated through the air. The lights overhead gleamed off glass display cases, filled with delicate necklaces, diamond-studded bracelets, and rings that sparkled under the perfect glow. The walls were lined with soft cream-colored panels, elegant and refined, designed to make customers feel like they had stepped into a world where wealth and class were effortless. But Xavier didn't feel welcome. A middle-aged woman behind the counter stiffened at the sight of him. Eleanor Hastings, her name tag read. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, and her lips were painted a sharp shade of red that matched the intensity of her gaze. She didn't smile. Instead, she folded her arms, her posture shifting in a way Xavier had seen too many times before, a small, almost imperceptible movement, like someone bracing themselves for something unpleasant, like someone waiting for him to make a wrong move. Xavier hadn't done anything yet, but in her eyes, he already had. He ignored the sinking feeling in his stomach and stepped forward, keeping his movements controlled, measured. His mother had taught him this too. Never give them a reason to see you as a threat, Xavier. Even when you're doing nothing wrong, you have to be twice as careful. A few customers in the store, an older white couple near the back, a well-dressed businessman inspecting a watch, glanced his way, then quickly looked away. Not one of them smiled. Eleanor, however, didn't look away. She was watching him too closely, her sharp eyes tracking his every movement. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice flat and cold, devoid of the warmth she had just used while speaking to the couple near the register. Xavier forced himself to smile, even though every instinct told him it wouldn't make a difference. "Yeah," he said, keeping his voice light. "I'm looking for a necklace. A birthday gift for my mom." Her eyes flicked downward, scanning his clothes, his shoes. Then she hesitated. It was subtle, a flicker of doubt, a moment where she seemed to question whether he belonged here at all. "Are you sure this is the right place?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "We have some pricey pieces here." Xavier's jaw clenched. He exhaled slowly, willing himself to stay calm. "I know," he said, keeping his voice even. He reached into his pocket, pulling out his wallet just enough for her to see the cash he had saved. I've got the money. Eleanor's eyes flicked to the bills, her expression tightening rather than relaxing. She didn't believe him. Or worse, she believed he had the money, but assumed he shouldn't. Where did you get that much cash? She asked, her voice laced with a sharp edge of suspicion. Xavier felt his stomach drop. He had known this might happen. He had prepared for it. But still, the blatant accusation, the suggestion that he couldn't possibly have earned his own money made his chest tighten. I work at Crescent Cafe, he said, carefully enunciating each word. I saved up for this. Eleanor let out a soft hum, tapping her manicured nails against the counter. It was the kind of nonchalant doubt that stung more than outright hostility. Uh-huh, she murmured, unimpressed. She still didn't move to help him. Instead, she glanced toward a security camera in the corner of the store as if making sure someone was watching. Xavier's fingers tightened around his wallet. He had seen this play out before. In stores. In restaurants. In the way people clutched their bags a little tighter when he walked by. This wasn't new. He could feel his heart pounding. The weight of every unspoken assumption pressing against his skin. The way her posture had shifted. The way the businessman subtly glanced at him again. The way the older couple had gone quiet. It was all there, hanging in the air like an unspoken warning. Xavier forced himself to stand tall. This was a store. A business. He was a paying customer. He had every right to be here. Can I see the necklace now? He asked, his voice calm but firm. Eleanor paused, and for a moment, he thought she might refuse. Then, slowly, reluctantly, she moved toward the display case, her heels clicking against the tile. Fine, she said, sighing as though he were wasting her time. But even as she pulled out the velvet tray holding the necklace, her eyes never left him. She was waiting for something. Waiting for him to mess up. Waiting for him to prove every assumption she had already made. And Xavier knew, deep down, that no matter what he did next, she had already decided who he was. Xavier held his breath as Eleanor Hastings placed the velvet tray on the counter, her movements sharp and deliberate. The silver necklace gleamed under the store's bright lights, delicate and elegant, the perfect gift for his mother. But even as she set it down, Eleanor's eyes never left him. Be careful with it, she said, her tone clipped. That necklace costs more than what most people make in a week. Xavier felt the heat rise in his chest. He knew what she was implying. Still, he swallowed the frustration bubbling inside him and reached for the necklace carefully. His fingers steady, controlled. The cool metal rested in his palm, the tiny pendant catching the light just right. It was exactly what he had imagined, something simple, but meaningful. Something his mother would cherish. For a moment, he allowed himself to smile. Then it happened. The necklace slipped. It tumbled from his fingers, the delicate chain twisting in the air before landing with a soft clink against the glass counter. It wasn't even a drop, more of a fumble, but the moment it happened, Eleanor gasped so dramatically it was as if he had shattered a priceless artifact. Oh my God! She shrieked, her voice slicing through the store like a siren. Every head in the room whipped toward them. Xavier's stomach plummeted. What? He started, but Eleanor had already taken a step back, her hand flying to her chest like she had just witnessed a crime unfold before her eyes. I knew it. She pointed a trembling finger at him, her expression morphing into one of pure, manufactured outrage. I saw you. You were trying to pocket it, weren't you? Xavier froze. For a second, the accusation didn't even register. It was so absurd, so wildly false, that his brain refused to process it. Then the weight of her words hit him like a freight train. No, he said immediately, his voice firm but calm. I wasn't. You dropped it on purpose. Eleanor cut him off, her voice rising in pitch, designed to make sure everyone in the store heard. You thought you could distract me and slip it into your pocket when I wasn't looking. Xavier's chest tightened. He could feel it happening, the shift in the room. The way the other customers subtly backed away, their eyes darting between him and Eleanor. The older woman near the bracelet section clutched her purse a little tighter. The businessman who had been looking at watches took a cautious step to the side, distancing himself. It was happening so fast, too fast. Eleanor's hand shot toward the phone on the counter. I'm calling the police, she announced. Right now. Xavier's pulse roared in his ears. His mind screamed at him to speak to make them understand. But he knew how this worked. He knew how quickly a lie became truth when the right person said it. "You don't need to do that," he said, forcing himself to stay composed. "I didn't steal anything." Eleanor snorted. "Oh, please. Do you think I'm stupid?" Her fingers were already dialing. "I've seen your kind before. You come in here, acting like you belong, waiting for the perfect moment to." Xavier flinched. "Your kind." The words slashed through him, their meaning cutting deep, raw, undeniable. "MAAM, he said, his voice low, steady, but laced with barely restrained fury. "I came in here to buy a necklace. That's all." Eleanor scoffed, gripping the phone tighter. "That's what they all say." She turned her back slightly, speaking into the receiver. "Yes, this is Eleanor Hastings at Sterling and Company. Jewelers," she said, her voice suddenly controlled. Professional, the voice of a responsible citizen reporting a crime. "We have a situation. Young black male, late teens, hoodie. Tried to steal merchandise, yes. He's still here." Xavier's hands curled into fists at his sides. The way she said it. Young black male. Hoodie. Like that was all the information they needed. Like it was enough. Like it was a crime just to exist in this store. The weight in his chest grew heavier, pressing down until it felt like his ribs might snap under the pressure. Across the store, the businessman shook his head. As if this was some inevitable outcome, as if he had known all along how this story would end. The older couple murmured to each other, their expressions a mixture of discomfort and quiet confirmation of their worst assumptions. The worst part? Not a single person spoke up. Not one. They just watched, like spectators at a show they had seen too many times before. And outside, in the distance, the faint sound of approaching sirens cut through the air like a warning. Xavier felt his pulse pound against his skull. This wasn't happening. Except it was. And no one was going to stop it. The sound of sirens grew louder, slicing through the heavy air inside Sterling and Company. Jewelers. The distant wail carried an unspoken promise someone was about to be taken away. Xavier stood frozen, his heartbeat thundering in his ears. His hands remained at his sides, his fingers curled into fists, but not clenched enough to look threatening. Every move mattered now. Eleanor still had the phone pressed to her ear, her voice dripping with urgency. "Yes, I need officers here now," she insisted. "He's getting aggressive." Xavier's stomach lurched. Aggressive? He hadn't moved. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't done anything but exist in the same space as her accusations. The room had gone deathly silent, but the weight of every unspoken judgment pressed down on him. The businessman pretended to check his watch, suddenly uninterested in the unfolding chaos. The older couple whispered in hushed tones, casting cautious glances his way, but saying nothing. No one was going to help him. They never did. Xavier took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm, to suppress the rage clawing at the back of his throat. "I didn't take anything," he said again, his voice low but controlled. "The necklace slipped. That's it." Eleanor let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Oh please," she scoffed. "Do you really expect me to believe that?" She pointed at the silver necklace still resting on the floor. "If I hadn't caught you, you would have stuffed it in your pocket and walked right out, wouldn't you?" Xavier's fingernails dug into his palms. "You don't know that," he said, keeping his tone measured, but the tension beneath his words was undeniable. Eleanor smirked, folding her arms. "I know enough," she said coldly. "I've been doing this for years. And let me tell you something, I know your type." There it was, not even an attempt to hide it anymore. "My type?" Xavier repeated, his jaw tightening. Eleanor shrugged. "Young men like you," she said, eyeing his sneakers, his hoodie, the way his fingers twitched at his sides like he was holding himself together by sheer force of will. "You come in here looking around like you belong, but the second you think no one's watching, you try to take what isn't yours." Xavier felt something snap inside him. He wanted to scream. He wanted to yell at her, to ask her how she could look at him and see a thief instead of a son, a student, a kid who had worked too many long hours to afford something nice for his mother. But he knew better. She didn't see any of that. She never would. A beat of silence passed, thick and suffocating. Then, the glass door swung open, and two police officers stormed in. The taller one, Sergeant Daniel Brooks, was already reaching for his handcuffs. His movements were practiced, familiar, like he had done this 1,000 times before, and never once considered the possibility that he might be wrong. The second officer, Michael Reyes, younger, sharper-eyed, hesitated. But not enough. "There he is," Eleanor said quickly, pointing at Xavier like she was identifying a dangerous suspect on a wanted poster. "That's him. He tried to steal from me." Xavier barely had time to react before Brooks took a step closer, his stance firm, authoritative. "Sir, put your hands where I can see them." Xavier's breath caught. The words rang in his head, familiar and terrifying. His fingers twitched by his sides. His whole body caught between fight or flight. But he knew that any movement, any hesitation, could make this worse. "I didn't take anything," he said again, forcing his voice to stay steady. Brooks's jaw tightened, unimpressed. "Not what I asked." He lifted the handcuffs. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Xavier's chest tightened, panic threading through his ribs like a vice grip. This was how it happened. This was how a moment spiraled into something irreversible. "Wait," Reyes spoke up, his gaze flicking to Eleanor. "What exactly happened here?" Eleanor let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she were the true victim here. "He came in, pretended to shop, and the moment I took my eyes off him, he grabbed that necklace." She gestured toward the floor. "I caught him before he could leave with it." Brooks didn't need to hear more. He stepped forward, ready to cuff Xavier. That's when Xavier did the only thing he could think of. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Call my mother." Brooks froze, caught off guard. He scoffed, shaking his head. "You'll get your phone call at the station, kid." "No." Xavier's voice hardened. "You need to call my mother, now." Eleanor rolled her eyes dramatically, folding her arms. "Oh, please," she muttered. "What's mommy gonna do? March in here and give a speech about injustice?" Xavier ignored her. He reached into his pocket. Not quickly, slowly, deliberately, making sure neither officer could mistake his movement for something dangerous. He dialed, hand steady despite the way his pulse thundered in his skull. When the call connected, his voice was clear, unwavering. "Mom. I need you at Sterling & Company Jewelers. Right now." Brooks's brows furrowed, irritation flashing in his expression. But something else too, something like hesitation. Reyes, meanwhile, was watching Xavier carefully, his jaw tight. The store was silent now, the tension crackling like a live wire. Xavier kept his eyes locked on Brooks, on Reyes, on Eleanor, because he knew what was coming next. And this time, they wouldn't be ready for it. Xavier stood his ground. The phone in his hand was still warm from the call. His mother's voice replaying in his mind, steady, commanding, razor sharp in its precision. "I'm on my way." The words should have reassured him. But they didn't. Because even with his mother coming, even with the truth on his side, he knew how quickly things could go wrong. Sergeant Daniel Brooks had already made up his mind. Xavier could see it in the way the officer stood firm, his grip tightening around the handcuffs. His jaw set like a man who wasn't interested in questions, only conclusions. Officer Michael Reyes still looked uncertain, his eyes flicking between Eleanor Hastings, the supposed victim, and Xavier, who hadn't so much as taken a step toward the exit. But he wasn't stopping anything, either. The older customers still watched in silence, frozen in their roles as passive witnesses, unwilling to intervene. The businessman near the watches pretended to check his phone, as if distancing himself from the uncomfortable scene unfolding before him. No one spoke up. They never did. Xavier knew this moment was fragile, balanced on a knife's edge. He had seen it before on the news, in whispered stories, in the way his mother's voice tensed whenever she reminded him to be careful. Never run, Xavier. Never reach too fast. Never argue. Just make it home. He inhaled slowly, forcing himself to stay still, to stay calm. But then Brooks took another step forward, and suddenly the distance between them felt suffocating. "Turn around," the officer ordered, lifting the cuffs. "Hands behind your back." Xavier's breath hitched. "I didn't steal anything," he repeated, his voice controlled but firm. "You can explain that at the station." Brooks shot back. Xavier's fingers itched at his sides. The instinct to defend himself, to shout, to demand they look at the security cameras clashed violently with the reality of the situation, a reality where speaking too loudly, moving too suddenly, could make things spiral out of control. His heart pounded. His mother was coming. He just had to hold on. But Brooks wasn't waiting. The officer grabbed Xavier's arm, yanking it back toward the cuffs. Xavier tensed instinctively, his body stiffening at the force. And suddenly, the moment shifted. The air in the store, already thick with tension, cracked like a struck match. Eleanor Hastings let out a sharp, exaggerated gasp. "There it is," she shouted. "He's resisting." Xavier's blood ran cold. Resisting. The word sank into his skin like a blade, carrying with it all the weight of stories that never ended well. He went completely still. His pulse hammered in his skull, but he forced his muscles to relax, to show no sign of struggle. "That's not what's happening," Xavier said through gritted teeth. Brooks only tightened his grip. "You don't get to decide that," the officer muttered. Reyes took a step forward now, something in his expression shifting. "Hold on," he said, glancing at Brooks. "Maybe we should." But before he could finish, the store's front doors swung open. The sharp click of high heels against tile cut through the air like gunfire. Every head turned. And there she was. Chief Celeste Collins, Xavier's mother, Brookdale's chief of police. She didn't storm in. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. Her presence alone was enough to crack the entire situation wide open. Her tailored navy blue suit was crisp, her badge glinting under the store's bright lights. Her eyes, so much like Xavier's, sharp and burning with restrained fury, swept over the scene in an instant. The tension in Brooks's shoulders twitched. Reyes exhaled sharply, stepping back. Eleanor Hastings' face drained of color, her mouth parting slightly, as if realizing too late exactly who she had just tried to frame. "Sergeant Brooks," Celeste said smoothly, her voice carrying the weight of authority, experience, and an unshakable command of the room. Brooks hesitated for the first time. His grip on Xavier loosened. "Ma'am," he acknowledged, his tone clipped, professional but no longer entirely certain. Celeste's eyes never left him. "Would you like to explain to me," she continued, her voice deceptively calm, "why my son is currently being detained for a crime he didn't commit?" Silence. A thick, suffocating silence. Reyes shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the security cameras. He was starting to realize exactly how bad this looked. But Celeste wasn't done. She turned to Eleanor, who visibly flinched. "And you," Celeste said, her voice dropping into something quieter, something dangerous. "Would you like to repeat what you told dispatch? The part where you called the police on a young man who never took anything from your store?" Eleanor stammered, her face twisting. I thought." "You thought what?" Celeste asked, tilting her head slightly. "That he didn't belong here?" Eleanor's lips pressed together, her pride warring with the truth that was now closing in on her from every direction. Brooks cleared his throat, desperate to regain control of the moment. "We received a call about an attempted theft," he said, straightening his shoulders. "We responded accordingly." Celeste's gaze snapped to him. "Accordingly?" she repeated. "So you walked in here, saw a black teenager, and immediately reached for your handcuffs without reviewing any evidence?" Brooks' jaw tensed. Reyes shifted again, his hesitation now full-blown discomfort. Celeste took a step closer. Her voice, still dangerously soft, cut through the air like a blade. "Tell me, Sergeant," she said. "Did you check the security footage before deciding my son was guilty?" Brooks said nothing, because they both knew the answer. Celeste exhaled, the anger in her eyes turning to something colder, something far more dangerous than raised voices or threats. She lifted her hand, gesturing toward the security cameras. "Then let's do that now," she said. Her voice left no room for argument. Eleanor paled further. Reyes nodded instantly, already turning toward the store manager. "But Brooks?" He hesitated. Because he already knew. He had walked into this store thinking he understood how this story ended. And now? Now, for the first time since he stepped through those doors, he wasn't so sure. The store was silent, save for the rhythmic click-click-click of Chief Celeste Collins's heels against the polished tile floor as she stepped toward the counter. It wasn't just her presence, it was the way she commanded the air around her. There was no shouting, no frantic accusations. She didn't need them. Her reputation preceded her. Sergeant Daniel Brooks straightened his posture, his fingers still hovering near his cuffs. Uncertainty flickered behind his eyes now. but it was masked beneath the rigid professionalism of a man who refused to admit he had made a mistake. Officer Michael Reyes had already taken a step back, his hesitation growing with each second. His gaze darted toward the security cameras, then back at Celeste, as if realizing, for the first time, that he had walked into the middle of something much bigger than an alleged shoplifting case. And then there was Eleanor Hastings. Her face had lost its smugness, her confidence fractured beneath the weight of realization. She wasn't just facing a random customer's angry mother, she was facing Brookdale's chief of police. "Let's review the footage," Celeste said, her voice smooth and unwavering. It wasn't a request. The store manager, a balding man in a navy blue blazer, who had been hovering awkwardly in the background, nearly jumped at her command. "Yes, of course," he stammered, fumbling with the small security monitor behind the counter. His fingers shook slightly as he navigated the interface, pulling up the footage from the last 20 minutes. The moment the screen flickered to life, no one moved. Xavier could feel his own pulse pounding in his ears, but he forced himself to watch. The recording played back in stark, undeniable clarity. There he was, walking into the store. Calm, polite, respectful. There was Eleanor, her eyes narrowing the second she saw him, her demeanor shifting instantly, as if she had already decided who he was before he even spoke. There was the moment he pointed to the necklace. The moment he showed his cash, the money he had worked tirelessly to save. Then, the necklace slipped from his fingers. A simple accident. No sudden movement. No attempt to steal. And then Eleanor's performance. The exaggerated gasp, the wild pointing, the accusations tumbling from her mouth like rehearsed lines in a bad play. The tape didn't lie. Celeste's expression remained unreadable as she watched. But the air in the room shifted. Reyes exhaled sharply, dragging a hand over his face. He knew. Brooks, however, remained rigid, his jaw tight, his grip on his cuffs still firm, as if he could somehow force the truth to change if he just refused to acknowledge it. "Eleanor?" She looked as if the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. She swallowed hard, her throat bobbing as she scrambled for a way out. "I thought," Celeste cut her off with a look. "Thought what?" she asked, her voice deceptively soft, like a blade hidden beneath silk. "That my son didn't belong in your store? That a black teenager with cash in his hand was somehow suspicious?" Eleanor opened and closed her mouth, searching for a justification, any justification, but there was none. Because she had never expected to be challenged. Never expected to be held accountable. Celeste let the silence stretch between them, letting Eleanor feel the weight of it. Then she turned to Brooks. "So," she said evenly, "do you still want to arrest my son?" Brooks bristled, shifting uncomfortably. "I was responding to a call," he said stiffly, his voice clipped. "I was doing my job." Celeste tilted her head. "Your job?" she echoed. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you were about to handcuff an innocent teenager without a shred of evidence." Brooks' jaw clenched. The situation was unfolding. "We didn't have time to." "You had plenty of time," Celeste interjected. "You had time to reach for your cuffs. You had time to assume my son was guilty, before you even asked him a single question. But you didn't have time to do the most basic part of your job, investigating the truth." A heavy beat of silence passed. Reyes looked like he wanted to disappear. Eleanor's face was pale, her confidence shattered. And for the first time since this nightmare had begun, Xavier felt something shift inside him. For so long, he had been standing there, trying to prove his innocence, trying to convince them that he wasn't who they assumed he was. But now they were the ones scrambling to explain themselves. Celeste took a slow step forward, her gaze locked onto Brooks. "You're going to walk out of this store," she said smoothly. "And you're going to rethink how you do your job. Because if I ever hear about you targeting another black teenager without cause, you and I are going to have a very different conversation." Brooks swallowed hard, but said nothing. Celeste's gaze swept over Reyes next. "And you," she added, "you had doubts. You hesitated. And while that's better than blindly jumping to conclusions, it still isn't good enough. You wear that badge. You better learn to use your own judgment, not just follow someone else's lead." Reyes nodded once, his face tight, ashamed. Then Celeste turned back to Eleanor. "And you, Mrs. Hastings," she said, her voice turning colder, "are about to learn that accusing innocent people has consequences. Eleanor blanched. "Chief Collins," she stammered. "I just made a mistake. I didn't mean." Celeste lifted a hand, silencing her. "You thought you could do this and walk away unscathed," she said. "But you were wrong." Then she turned to Xavier. "Let's go," she said gently. Xavier hesitated for only a second, then stepped away from the counter, stepping over the very accusation that had nearly cost him everything. And as he walked out of Sterling and Company Jewelers, head held high, he didn't look back. But Eleanor did. She watched them leave, her face pale, her lips pressed into a tight, thin line. Because for the first time in her life, she wasn't the one in control. 3 days had passed. 3 days since Xavier Collins had walked out of Sterling and Company Jewelers, leaving behind the weight of false accusations, silent judgment, and the suffocating feeling of being seen as guilty before proven innocent. But the story hadn't ended there, not this time. The fallout had been swift and unrelenting. By the next morning, the incident was everywhere: news stations, social media, and local forums. Brookdale's most prestigious jewelry store was now at the center of a racial profiling scandal. The internet reacts. The security footage had been leaked online, a brutal, undeniable truth playing out in high definition. Millions watched as Eleanor Hastings' expression hardened the second Xavier walked in. Millions saw her question him, doubt him, humiliate him. Millions heard her lie to the police, painting him as a criminal before he had even had a chance to defend himself. And then there was the moment of reckoning, the instant Chief Celeste Collins walked in. Her presence cutting through the entire charade like a knife. The video spread like wildfire. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, all of it exploded with outrage. The backlash. Sterling and Company scrambled to control the damage. By the end of the second day, their Yelp page had been bombarded with 1-star reviews. "Would give 0 stars if I could. Don't shop here unless you want to be accused of theft. Disgusting. Fired an innocent teen up in front of cops like he was an animal. Never shopping here again." The store released a statement, but it was too little, too late. "We take allegations of racial profiling very seriously and are conducting an internal review to ensure this never happens again. No apology. No accountability. Just damage control." Eleanor Hastings faces the consequences. By the third day, Eleanor Hastings was gone. Fired. Indefinitely. Rumors swirled that she had been forced out the door before corporate could decide whether to issue a public apology or simply hope the world moved on. But the world wasn't moving on. And neither was Chief Celeste Collins. Accountability begins. Xavier sat at the kitchen table, scrolling through the flood of messages on his phone. Some were from classmates, others from complete strangers. "I saw what happened to you, bro. I'm so sorry. That woman deserved to be fired. Stay strong, Xavier. We're all behind you." He should have felt victorious. Instead, he felt exhausted. Because it shouldn't have taken a viral video for people to believe him. He put his phone down as his mother walked in. Her face set with the kind of calm determination that meant she was already 2 steps ahead of everyone else. "They've launched an internal investigation into Brooks," she said, taking a seat across from him. Xavier blinked. "Wait. Seriously?" Celeste nodded. He didn't follow protocol. Didn't ask questions. Didn't check the footage. He just went straight for the cuffs. Xavier exhaled sharply. Good. He thought back to that moment, the way Brooks had grabbed him, the way Eleanor had gasped and cried, "He's resisting." Like it was the final act of a play she had been directing the whole time. He still felt the weight of it in his chest. But this time, the weight wasn't on him anymore. This time, it was on them. A lesson, but not a victory. "Will it change anything?" Xavier asked, his voice quieter now. His mother watched him carefully. "Maybe," she said honestly. "Maybe not." Xavier nodded slowly, staring at the table. "Feels like no matter what, this keeps happening." Celeste reached across, placing a steady hand over his. "You fought back," she said. "That's more than most people get to do." He swallowed hard. Yeah. But why should he have had to fight at all? The necklace that meant more than gold. A soft clink interrupted his thoughts. Xavier looked up as his mother placed something on the table in front of him. His breath caught in his throat. The necklace. The same silver necklace he had been trying to buy. "Where did you?" Celeste gave him a knowing smile. "I called the district manager," she said simply. "Told him exactly what happened. He delivered it himself. For free." Xavier stared at it. the chain catching the light, delicate and perfect. It was supposed to be a birthday gift. But now, it was something more. It was a reminder. A symbol. Not just of what had happened but of what he had survived. He exhaled slowly, picking up the necklace, running his fingers over the cool metal. "She's gonna love it," he murmured. Celeste's smile softened. "She already does, baby." Xavier glanced up, meeting his mother's eyes. And for the first time since he had stepped into that jewelry store, he felt lighter. Justice served, but the fight continues 3 days ago. He had walked into that store thinking the worst thing that could happen was not finding the right gift. Instead, he had learned something far more painful. The truth doesn't always matter until you force people to see it. And today, they had seen it. The battle wasn't over. It never really was. But for now, this was enough. The story of Xavier Collins is more than just an incident in a jewelry store. It's a reflection of the quiet battles fought every day by those who are judged before they are known. It's about injustice, but also about resilience. One of the most powerful lessons here is that truth doesn't always speak for itself sometimes. It takes courage, persistence, and the right people standing in the right places to make sure it is heard. Without his mother's authority, would Xavier have been believed? Would the store have admitted their mistake? Or would his story have been just another statistic? For many, the weight of prejudice is a lifelong burden. But this story reminds us that accountability matters. When people in power, whether it be a police officer, a store manager, or an everyday witness, fail to challenge injustice, they allow it to continue. So, what can we do? Speak up. Challenge assumptions. Be the voice that breaks the silence. It shouldn't take a viral video or a high-ranking official to expose the truth. It should only take a willingness to listen, to see, and to stand for what is right. Xavier's story is a reminder that injustice thrives in silence. But accountability begins with action. The fight for fairness isn't just about one moment. It's about changing the way we see and treat each other every day. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and subscribe to join us in sharing powerful stories of resilience, justice, and hope.